Welcome to this new presentation of OTF Connects titled Election by the Numbers, Inquiry and Blended Learning with Zoe Flatman and Rachel Colishaw. And this is the third episode in our series of Election Canada webinars. And we are recording this webinar so that teachers in Ontario will be able to access it later on the website of the Ontario Teachers Federation and on the website of Election Canada. Before we start the presentation, I'm going to quickly read a land acknowledgement, which we do before each session. We acknowledge that we are gathered in the territories of various Indigenous people, and we further recognize their stewardship of these lands in which we live, learn, work, and play. And so we are just doing a recording for this session. It's not really a session with participants, at least not for the moment, but we are still doing the recording. And Zoe Flatman and Rachel Colishaw will be presenting the material. Zoe Flatman is an award-winning teacher in the Toronto District School Board. She is currently on secondment with Election Canada as the Civic Education Coordinator for the Greater Toronto Area. Zoe has a passion for global citizenship, sustainability, and civic engagement. And Rachel Colishaw is the second presenter, and she's a secondary school teacher and instructional coach in the Ottawa area. She's the recipient of the 2013 Governor General History Award for Excellence in Teaching. She's also the author of several history and citizenship learning resources. And she's currently on secondment as pedagogical advisor to Election Canada. And so Zoe and Rachel, we're going to do a recording of the session. And I think you can go ahead. Let me stop sharing my screen and you should be able to share yours.
Okay, good. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's an honor to be here today to share this resource with your members, and I'm happy to just walk through and demonstrate some of the key features. So today we're going to be talking about elections by the numbers, which is a little bit different than some of our other resources. It is a numeracy piece that has really broad applications, not just for civics or history or geography, where it does fit very nicely, but also for math. So this could be used in a data management course as well. So it's got a lot of applications, and it's kind of a fun one that gets students really thinking about the ideas of patterns and trends and representing data in a variety of ways. So we'll skip over the poll, and just a reminder for those who haven't watched or participated in our previous webinars, Elections Canada offers resources that are all inquiry-based, cross-curricular, collaborative, nonpartisan, bilingual, accessible, and free. And we'll talk about how you can access these materials a little bit later. All of our resources are available to order as a physical kit or download from our website, and we'll give you the link at the end, as I mentioned. All of our resources have high quality content, including videos, maps, data, infographics, case studies, and more. So we also, of course, with the switch to online learning, have now looked a little bit more at how we can help teachers in a blended learning format. So we've come up with blended learning guides and tools that teachers can use. And you can see a photo here of one of our blended learning guides. What we do is we offer a bit of a menu of options for online or in-person learning for each of the phases of the lesson, and teachers can choose to blend or use whatever works best in their environment. So maybe they want to use the Minds On in person and then do the activity online and come back together for a consolidation in person, or whatever combination works best in their learning environment and with their students. So in developing these blended learning tools for our resources, we wanted to keep in mind good blended learning pedagogy. And these are the criteria that we have put at the fore of these tools, particularly things like increased student to student and student to teacher collaboration, increase control of for the student over time, place, pace, and path of learning, as well as repurposed instructional time. And that can look like a lot of different things, oftentimes getting students to do a lot of the reading or critical thinking on their own, gives them the time and space to do that, and then also helps to repurpose time in the classroom where we can have conversation when students already have that background in that critical thinking. So today we are going to talk about elections by the numbers, and each of our resources has an inquiry question. For this one, the question is, how does youth voting compare to that of other age groups? So it's a really interesting one that's going to get into that numeracy piece, but also that critical thinking. And that's the question that students are going to explore in this activity. So all of our lessons or activities follow a three-part lesson plan: a minds on, activity, and consolidation. For the minds on, the goal is really to connect to students where they are and to connect them to the ideas that we're going to be talking about throughout the lesson. So in this case, we want to prompt them to think about trends that they see around them. And we can give them prompts like fashion or games or music. These questions really are just meant to guide a class discussion, and teachers can choose to use a simple protocol such as a think, pair, share to help all of the students to engage in the thinking about the topic. So for the online version, we have set up a Google Jamboard to guide students through the thinking activities. And this entire activity is housed on this Jamboard. So we will be referencing different frames, and a frame is really like a page in Jamboard. And so for this Minds On, we're going to start with frame 2. So I'm hoping that you can see the Jamboard. Is that correct? Can everybody see that? So we would have students think about this, and they can add a sticky note. So for example, you might want to think about what is a trend from when you were 15 years old. I'm not going to put up a picture.
No, it's okay, but we did the exercise yesterday, and I must say I was really, it's a really very neat application, Jamboard. It's very visual, and you can do a lot of things. You can bring in all kinds of elements and pages and documents. Really, it's very interactive. I really like it a lot.
Yeah. So students can just place their sticky notes on the Jamboard and have a conversation about trends and and talk about, it could be in the school, it could be in the community. So students might talk about a particular game that's popular at the moment or that kind of thing, right? Or they might talk about things that students are doing at the moment in the school or in the community. So you get the idea. We can just move the sticky notes around and have a conversation as a class about trends and what they look like. So moving on, once we have students thinking about this, we want to now make the connection between these trends and voting. So again, we would normally just have a conversation in class about this, but on our Jamboard, we can now move on to the next frame 3, and think about how we can now apply this to voting trends. So if we move to frame 3, here's where we can again start with our sticky notes and start thinking, do you think there are different voting trends for different age groups, and why? So students might say things like, older generations vote more than young people. Oops. And we can move the sticky notes around. How might you compare the different trends for different age groups? So this can be kind of a wide open question where you might think about how do you track these trends, how do you represent them, and that kind of thing. So we're getting into transitioning now into this idea of how we're going to represent different kinds of trends. Okay. So now we move into the activity phase of the lesson. And since we're talking a lot about data here and thinking about how we interpret it and how we represent it, we start with analyzing a graph using the questions that are provided. And so you can see here, we have a graph of voter turnout at every federal election since 1867. So we want students now to start thinking about this concept of representation and what does data mean, how do we interpret it, and eventually how we're going to represent it. So again, if we go to our Jamboard, students can, in a classroom, we would have them working in small groups on thinking about this and looking for trends. And then in our online adaptation, again, we move to the next frame in our Jamboard and start thinking about this phenomenon. So we go to Jamboard, we can start thinking what is included, what is not included, what do we observe? So for example, one thing we might comment on is that this graph starts at 50%. So why is that? Why does it not start at 0? Might be one observation. Another observation might be that there's not an even spread. In other words, even number of years between elections. And why might that be? Whoops. For example, we might notice periods of very low turnout and periods of very high turnout. So for example, up here we might, whoops, sorry. So why, whoops, I'm still not, I beg your pardon. That's okay. So why is there a high voter turnout here for sort of 3 elections in a row, and then yet we've got a lot of lower voter turnout down in this area here. So lots of different things that students can conclude and start to think about. And this is really going to be helpful in terms of how they think about representing the data that they're going to represent. So we want to introduce them to some of these key ideas and get them really thinking about it. Okay. So, and we can use sticky notes or drawing in this case to kind of elicit a lot of that conversation. And then we introduce students to voter turnout by age group. And you'll notice that the data in this table has been updated and now includes the 2019 election data. The previous version of this resource compared 2011 and 2015, but we've now added a 3rd year of data for students to start to look at. And you can have your students simply use this table for the activity as is, or if you want, you can have your students complete this activity sheet to understand the difference between changes in percentage point and changes in percent. So as you can see from the first worked example, it can be quite a difference. So for example, from 2011 to 2015, 18 to 24-year-olds saw an increase in 18 percentage points, but that's actually a 47% increase in voter turnout. So there's quite a big difference there. The second example, where we go from 2015 to 2019, voter turnout decreased by about 3 percentage points, or about 5%. Okay. So sometimes the spread is a little bit less, but sometimes it can be quite large. And this might be something that students want to consider when they are thinking about how they're going to represent this data. Okay, so if the students are not already working with a partner or small group, this is a really great time to do it so they can help each other complete this activity. So this is an optional extension, depending on what it is you want to do. So we've provided 2 options in the online activity. So one is a fillable Google Doc where the students can do the calculations and enter the values, or as a spreadsheet. And which of these you choose depends on really what your learning goals are. Are your students learning to create formulas and select an appropriate chart or graph in a spreadsheet? Or are you looking for them to generate more creative or persuasive infographic ideas? Okay. And again, this whole portion is a little bit optional depending again on your class and what your learning goals are, but we've given you options to meet those needs depending on what it is that you are trying to accomplish. So the meat of the really heart of this activity is now for students to think about how they're going to represent this data. Okay, so they're going to brainstorm ways to represent that voter turnout data that we saw to answer the question of how does youth voting compare to that of other groups. So students can create any kind of graph or chart or image or infographic that supports your learning goals. This should be rather sort of conceptual rather than an attempt to create a polished finished product within one class. So we would give students typically about 20 to 30 minutes to work together to come up with kind of a rough draft overall vision for how they would go about doing this. So if you're in an in-person setting, you can give them chart paper or whiteboards and markers, whatever you have access to. As you can see here, students have come up with some quite different ideas. And you can see that these images are from the previous edition of the resource, which only compared data from 2 different elections. So in comparing 3 elections, students can get even more creative, but you get an idea of just how varied these representations can be. In an online, again, we're going to use the same Jamboard, and by assigning each group one of the frames, they can use that frame to really talk about and brainstorm their ideas as a small group. And so we've set up one frame for each group to work on their ideas. And if they're using the spreadsheet, they can create the graph in the spreadsheet and then just put their graph or chart right here. Or they can sketch their ideas on paper, take a picture, upload it to the Jamboard, whatever suits what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So we would normally go back to...
I think we should go, Zoe, and just show some of the different options that teachers could use with the Jamboard.
Sure, absolutely. So let's go to frame 7. So here's one idea. So it's blank at the moment. So students, if they wanted to create a graph, for example, or just have some kind of reference, could certainly change the background. And they can use that as lines to draw on a graph. Sure.
Here's my great rectangles. They're really a little bit wobbly.
So maybe I would draw, or I would suggest, you know, a line graph. Whoop.
Where did everybody go?
I don't know. Sorry about that. So you can, at any rate, you can see. I'm just going to refresh and see if that helps. There we are. So there's our graph. Another option would be to use graph paper as a background. I'm going to go on to another one. So maybe I want, as a group, to do an infographic, and I'm going to draw circles. So this is 2011, and this is 2015. It's much bigger. And then 2019, it got smaller again for youth. So something along those lines, or any kind of representation that your students are interested in. Oops, we cleared that background. Do we want the graph paper?
Sure.
Okay. So I think that you can get the idea that there's a lot of different things, or simply, as we mentioned, just simply uploading a photo of a drawing of some sort. And you saw the variety that was available from the in-class student examples that we've done previously. So those were all examples from classrooms in the Greater Toronto area. And they were primarily grade 9 geography classes as well, who were looking at patterns and trends in their curriculum. Okay, so if we go on, so in person, students can post their work around the room. You can have them do a jigsaw or a gallery walk, or pair with other groups to explain their thinking. One good way to do it is a protocol. I know Rachel talks about it a lot. The stay and stray. It's a new term I've learned, and I love that. I love that thinking. So some members of the group will stay with their work. The other members will begin to move about the class and have conversations. So those who stay with the product can answer questions, explain their thinking to the students who are coming around and looking at it. And then partway through those, they would switch. So those who had stayed will now stray through the rest of the representations, and the students who were straying will come back and stay with their own product. And it's a really good way of having that conversation and that interaction between students, and really getting a sense of what other students are doing. For the online adaptation, what we suggest is that students look through the various frames, and they can leave sticky notes in response to the same questions, really. So, for example, if I were going into
my beautiful
Rachel's, yes, you know, I might say something like, I like the graph. It shows the information clearly. You might think about using different colors.
Yeah. Or students can ask each other questions too, like, why did you choose to represent the information this way, or why did you choose to include or exclude various pieces of data? Because they're working with, you know, quite a lot of data sets, and maybe they have to make some choices to include some information and not include others. So maybe they just choose to focus on comparing youth voting rates over those 3 elections and with the, you know, sort of 65 plus group, and kind of like leave out the middle group, because that's where, you know, the differences were more pronounced.
Or maybe they decided to focus on the change in voter turnout. And so they're only showing the change amongst those various years and various age groups, and showing that, you know, there was quite a leap in youth voter turnout between 2011 and 2015, whereas in older demographics, the change was very small, if at all. It, you know, remained fairly much the same. So whatever it is that they chose as the important information, and the way that they address that question is really up to the individual groups. So they could leave questions about that as well, for sure. So every lesson concludes with an exit card with questions for reflection, because like all of the resources that we've been sharing, particularly in a face-to-face class, but also in the online adaptations, you know, the lessons are really busy and noisy, and there's lots of action and conversation, and that's really important. But we also want to you know, now give students something that will help them put the learning into their long-term memory. And this is really important when you're doing inquiry lessons successfully, is to give them that time for metacognition and reflection.
I think there's an animation on this slide.
There is, sorry. Did it come up?
One more.
Ah, there we go.
So we've got the first question and the second question. Great.
Yep. So these are just questions for students to consider now, to think about and reflect on what it is that they've done throughout the lesson. So I like the idea about making predictions, and I think that that's really interesting for students to do.
Well, and I think especially now that the resource includes 3 data points, you can start to have a much better idea about predicting, right? But of course, then you can also think, well, we would maybe need more data going back further to see what the overall long-term trends are.
And if you think back to the graph at the beginning as well, there really was quite a lot of variation. And was there any kind of overall pattern that could be discerned? I'm not sure. So, how does that impact on our prediction? And when you look at the data, I'm not sure that we had a really good look at it, but if you have a look at the voter turnout in the different age groups, there's a bit of volatility in the younger age groups. But if you look, in the 75 and older, there was a big jump, but then it's kind of stayed the same. And in those middle years, 45 to 74, there's not a huge amount of change. So are they likely to stay relatively the same? Probably, right? So, we might come to some of those conclusions. And again, even in the overall all ages, there was a big jump between 2011 and 2015, but then not a lot of difference in 2019. So there's lots to unpack there and lots for students to think about as they try to make some predictions. And that's, again, a really great critical thinking piece that we want our students to be really engaging in as they take some lessons from this particular activity. Okay, well, I'm going to guess there aren't going to be any questions. So just as a little bit of a reminder, we do have a whole variety of resources. And the important thing I think to really think about is that, particularly here in Ontario, we want to emphasize that these are not just for civics, that these resources have broad applications. So as I had already mentioned with elections by the numbers, it fits very well into that grade 9 geography strand of patterns and trends and getting students thinking in those terms. And I've worked with a number of grade 9 geography classes to do that. It is also great in civics, thinking about these issues in civics obviously is very important. It could be good in history as well. Or as I mentioned,
yeah, I was going to say in your data management class to kind of introduce that idea of how do you represent data before you have students run off and work with giant data sets. But I think there's also a really important literacy application with this resource because, understanding and unpacking infographics is a really important part of our English curriculum here in Ontario as well. So it can be a great way into that and preparing students for the literacy test or just for, general literacy for life.
Absolutely. And that infographics piece, I think, is a really important one that, again, gives it that broad application. If we're going to be asking students to create infographics, we want to give them the tools, and this is a great way to introduce that. And as Rachel said, the data management class where students are going to go and do individual products and collect data sets and work on how to represent them. It's a great introduction. And for those teachers, we also on our website in this resource, we have a link to our Elections Canada site, and there's lots of rich data there that teachers and students can access on variability and sampling and all of those other, complex kinds of applications and concepts. So that's a great one. We've talked about digital skills and voting rights through time in our previous webinars. They're amazing resources that, again, have all of those great features of critical thinking and really broad application across the curriculum. So the digital skills is a great literacy piece across the curriculum as well. And we have the geography specific resources at the bottom there beside the elections by the numbers, which fit into a wide variety of curriculum. And in fact, one of the things that we can do is we can, where am I? I'm just going to pause sharing for a moment, go to our website. And if you look under the helpful tools, tab, you can see the curriculum connections section. For Ontario, I'm going to just put in English, although all of our resources are available in French as well, with simplified language versions for French immersion students and the regular versions for Francophone students. I'm going to search just in English to help limit some of these. Otherwise, we can have lots and lots of results. So if we look at this particular resource, we can see all of the applications. So English Media Studies, grade 9 and 10 English, as well as politics and geography, and the mathematics as well. So there are lots of different applications for this particular resource. The other helpful tool that we have, in our professional learning, we have support videos that show you how, in about 5 minutes or so, how you can use these resources in your classroom. In their original intended version, these were recorded last year, last January actually, and so they don't include the blended learning adaptations, but you can still see how you could use them throughout your classroom. So I would highly recommend those, and our new offering, which is virtual sessions for groups of teachers. So if you have a department in your school, or a group of department heads, or just a group of colleagues that really want a little bit more information about our resources and how to use them, or to investigate some of these key topics, we would welcome you to fill out the online form, and one of the educational consultants will get back to you, and we can organize a PD session just for your group of teachers, with any of our resources. So those are great tools that are available as well on our website, electionsanddemocracy.ca. And of course, all of our resources are here as well. So you can see online, everything's available here for download. Here's our blended learning adaptations are here near the top, just under the teacher's guide. And then all of the table and the graphs, exit cards, activity sheets, etc., are all here for your use. We also have PowerPoint slide decks that teachers can use in their classroom to guide the lesson. So all of this is available free for teachers. So we've gone through our curriculum actions. This is our website. We also have social media channels. You can follow us on Twitter @DemocracyCA, or our French Twitter handle @DemocratyCA, as well as Elections and Democracy on Facebook. So if you do use our resources in your classroom, we would love to see them in action, and we'd love to see photos. And please tag us on social media if you do, so that we can see how they're being used in your classrooms, because we're always excited to see that and to see how students engage with them. So I think that is about it. Unless you can think of anything else, Rachel, that you want to add?
No, it's all great.
Yeah.
You covered everything, Zoe.
Okay, well, thank you.
You indeed did, Zoe. Really, it was very professional, very thorough. You really went over it in great details. And I just want to thank you. I don't know if you can hear me well. I think there's a little bit of problem with my internet maybe, but I just want to thank you again for the 3 sessions that you have provided for the Ontario teachers, and all the resources that you have created for the Ontario teachers, and for doing this recording with us today. And that recording will be available on the Ontario Teachers Federation website. And I just want to thank you once again, and hope that we will work again with you and with Rachel next season. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this great opportunity. We've enjoyed sharing these resources with everyone.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Zoe, and thank you so much, Rachel.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Bye-bye.